Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC.
個性的な部屋だね。実は私には生き別れの兄がいまして、ブラザーある日デスメタルで天下を取ると言ってギター片手に旅に出て、そのまま音信不通に。ああ、はいはい、お兄さんの部屋を使ってんだね。これって特攻服ってやつ？名前が刺繍で入ってるね。血まみれ天女、初代特攻隊長、春宮椿。うわー、ギャーギャー、これはボベボベボベボベボベボー。
I'd heard some rumors that Kiki used to be one heck of a troublemaker, but this was something else. Even I was dumbfounded. She wore a striking headband in what appeared to be a commemorative group photo with her gang members. So if Kiko was a butterfly now, then the girl in the photo must have been her as a caterpillar, an entirely different person. This very room itself was a vile caterpillar, and she transformed from a caterpillar to a butterfly. So, could that happen to me too someday? Of course not. Because I was already a filthy, revolting, vile caterpillar.
そんなことないよ。
Huh? Who said that? I heard someone calling me in my sleep. It was the first time I'd heard that voice, and yet I knew who it was. I slowly opened my eyes and saw myself.
行こうよ。行こうよってどこへ？決まってるじゃないさ。そう、ムーンスートの王子様の国へ。それは行けるものなら行きたいよ。でも私はもう落ち込むことはないんだよ。だってムーンスートの王子様には不思議な力があるんだもの。
Huh? What was she talking about?
ムーンスートの王子様は体の中に聖なる裾を持ってるの。それを取り込めば元の綺麗な体に戻ることができるんだよ。本当に綺麗な体に戻ることができれば、エリス姫とムーンスートの王子様は結ばれてハッピーエンド。ハッピーエンド。さあ行こうよエリス。私の手を取って。一緒にムーンスートの王国へ旅立とう。ムーンスートの王子様はもうすぐそこにいるんだよ。
After a few moments, I reached out and took my antlered doppelganger's hand, and then I saw a scarlet gleam before her eyes. The delicious scent of tea tickled at my nose. I slowly regained consciousness. Where was I? I was supposed to have been sleeping in my own bed. Yet I'd woken up to find myself in my school uniform, sitting at a table with fragrant tea in front of me.
なんだこれ。
I couldn't move my arms. It was like they were glued to my body or something. I couldn't tear them free. Confused, I looked at my body to discover I was wrapped in a silver blanket. No, these were strings. Those silver strings had me tied to the chair. I was in an oddly designed house dyed in silver, as though it had been buried in snow. It took me a while to realize this room was like a cocoon.
窮屈にしちゃってごめんね。
見延先輩。
おいらね、スズムのこと好き、大好きだから結ばれたいと思ってる。変かな。
変じゃないです。自然なことだと思います。でも訳も分からずこうして縛られてたら、その気持ちは伝わりにくいんじゃないかなと思います。
そうだね。でも安心して。結ばれる時にはちゃんとそれほどくから。その前にしなくちゃならないことがあるの。
Minobe placed knives and forks on the table with a clatter. It looked like she was setting the table for dinner, but there were too many places. She placed multiple sets of knives, forks, spoons, and other utensils whose purpose were a mystery to me. Eventually, it looked more like she was setting up for a surgery. Once I realized that, I finally noticed those other creepy utensils were in fact tools used in abdominal surgery.
どんなフルコースだろう。これだけ食器が並ぶと期待しちゃうかな。でも僕が食べる側だといいんだけれどね。
My restraints were sturdier than I'd expected. All I could do was squirm like a caterpillar.
食べるのはおいら。
何を食べるの？
すす。ムーンスートの王子様の肝の中にたっぷりと溜め込んである神の呪いのすす。そのすすの詰まった赤くて黒い王子様の生き肝をつるり。
Minobe slurped loudly as she looked hungrily down on me. My hands were clammy. I could tell by the look in her eyes she was serious.
そうすれば私は元の姿に戻れるの。汚れた醜い体から生まれ変われるの。
どこも醜くなんかないです。
醜い。これを見てもそんなことが言えるかな。
Minobe rolled her skirt up to her navel. She then thrust her fingers under her skin with a splash and pulled the flesh off her legs like a pair of pants. Her lower half was like a giant caterpillar's, dyed with garish colors and spots.
ね。こんな汚れた化け物の体じゃ王子様と結ばれるわけがない。王子様と結ばれるお姫様は清らかで美しい体でなくちゃ。
もし君の言う醜い姿というのがそれで、それが生まれ持った体だというのなら、僕は醜いなんて思わない。
そんなわけないよ。こんな姿で触れてきたわけない。なのに化け物にこんな醜い姿に。
Minobi covered her face and wept. I tried to think of something comforting to say when suddenly her eyes widened and she cackled.
でも大丈夫。聞いたの。王子様の聖なる筒を口にすれば呪いは解けるんだってさ。
僕の肝を食べるってこと。でもそんなことをされたら僕は死んじゃう。
死なれたら困るよ。だからもちろん死なさない。だって王子様とお姫様は結ばれてハッピーエンドにならなきゃいけないんだから。
でもそんな物騒なものでお腹を開かれたら大変だ。
大丈夫。ちゃんと裁縫セットでお腹を縫うからさ。あれ、そういえばお裁縫セットの用意がないよ。危ない危ない。すぐに閉じて縫わないとお腹の中身が全部出ちゃうもんね。
Minobi turned her back to me and started fishing through the silk-covered cabinet. This was my chance to make a clean break. I bent over, picked up one of the upside-down knives with my teeth, and inserted it under my armpit. I twisted my body in various ways until I felt the blade meet one of the strings. I managed to make a small incision into the string. I twisted my body some more, and little by little it grew bigger.
ねえねえスズムーン、お腹を縫う糸は何色がいい？
Her back was still turned. I was getting closer to freedom by the second.
いろんな糸があるよ。バニラ色にチョコレート色、ペパーミント色とかいいよね。でもやっぱスズムンにはブルーハワイ色が似合いそうかな。
Just a little more. Just a little more. The table and chairs were cleaved in half by a giant saw. She pulled it out from the cabinet and was now wielding it. The blade cut through the chair I'd just been sitting in like it was butter.
スズムンすっごい。どうやって糸切ったの？
ミノベ先輩じゃないよ。誰だか知らないけれど、それ以上僕が尊敬するミノベ先輩の姿を恥ずかしめる
なら
な。怒る。本気で。
She doubled over with laughter as the crack of snapping twigs resounded from her head. Just then, magnificent deer antlers sprouted out of it. Her eyes flashed scarlet, demonstrating the majesty of a higher being who looked down on humans.
面白きからすすはらすずむ。やはりお前は面白い。そして陸奥の末裔。1000年を超えて今頃何をしてみせるというのか。貴様の役目はただ一つ。すすを溜め込んだその生き肝を我に に報じることよ。
She swung the saw again, shattering the floor I'd been standing on mere seconds prior.
身軽だな。ただ逃げ場はないぞ。
本物の美濃部先輩はどこにいる？
この線ね、そのように問われて答えるアホにあった試しがないわ。だがメイドの土産に教えてやってもいい。
月並みだけれど感謝するよ。
Just one hit from that terrifying saw would cleave me in two. For a moment, my legs threatened to freeze up with fear. But thanks to the strength of heart I'd cultivated over the years, I managed to keep my head.
あれの母の愚かなことと言ったら。
The girl with deer antlers laughed scornfully as she spoke. The heartbroken mother welcomed a suspicious man who healed her wounds with sweet words and cajolery into her home. Then she surrendered her heart, not realizing that the man intended to sink his fangs into her daughter as well. Minobi saw how happy her mother was, so she dutifully endured the man's infringement on the sanctuary she called home. But that man was a repulsive demon who preyed on heartbroken souls, manipulating their hearts to nourish himself. This was her mental world. Oh, excuse me for just a second. Apologies for that. Every aspect of it was a symbol of the pain she held deep within her, and the cursed soot greedily fed off her emotional scars.
器用に避ける。なぜ恐怖に身をすくめぬのか。やはりお前は特別な男よ。1000年をかけるだけのことはある。お前が望むならば叶えて結ばせてやってもいい。
生き肝を食われてどう結ばれるんだか。
安心せよ。ここはおとぎの世界。肝を食われた程度では死にはせぬ。この世界にてあのかなえと二人して幸せに暮らせばよかろう。
そういうわけにはいかないんだ。明日も学校があるからね。お腹が開いてたらみんな驚いちゃうよ。
無論肝を取り出した後は丁寧に縫い合わせてやろうぞ。
無理だと思うな。
なぜそう思う？
だって君不器用そうだものね。
気に入ったぞ、陸奥の末裔鈴原すずめ。貴様のすす生き地ごとすべて すり尽くしてくれる。
Giant caterpillars had assembled to consume Princess Elisa's beautiful castle. Shreds of the card soldiers torn to pieces in battle were strewn everywhere. Kane and the Siege King were facing off at the giant siege board in the courtyard. The Siege King was at an overwhelming advantage, as though alluding to the tragic state of affairs. Kane's pieces were devoured and shattered one after the next. Every time she gave up a part of her body to summon new ones. But the Siege King destroyed them relentlessly, driving her body and spirit to the edge.
今日はめでたい日になるのでちゅ。エリス姫を僕ちんの家族にお迎えできるのでちゅからね。
Kane unconsciously dropped what she was holding. It looked like a stuffed pincushion impaled by countless pins. But it wasn't. It was a doll that represented her waged body parts. She had to give up a part of her body to create new pieces every time she lost one. Normally, one would have to remove them manually via torturous methods, as per the rules of Siege. But the Siege King had chosen not to do that. Instead of losing body parts, Kane would offer them up as collateral and give them to the Siege King. The stuffed pincushion at her feet signified what parts of her body now belonged to the Siege King. There were already pins everywhere, like a hedgehog. In other words, the Siege King already owned Kane's whole body.
また駒が足りなくなってきたでちゅね。でももうエリス姫の体でかけられる部分はないでちゅね。
Still, this wasn't a game in which she could afford to admit defeat. Her castle had already fallen. She had nowhere to run. To give up would be to surrender her body and soul. Continuing to resist no matter the crisis was her only way left of protecting her heart.
なら今度はエリス姫の心を担保にしてもらうでちゅよ。ほら、今度はハートのピンクッションでちゅ。
The Siege King handed her a heart pincushion. Kane timidly reached for her sewing kit, stuffed with pins. If she stabbed it, she could keep fighting in exchange for part of her heart. She had no other choice. But to do so would mean gradually accepting surrender each time.
ミラあんたなんかに絶対に屈するもんか。
Her mind made up, Kane took about 10 pins and thrust them into the heart. There wasn't supposed to be pain involved. Yet Kane felt like she'd been literally stabbed in the heart. The ground at her feet felt mushy for a second. Sickly drops of sweat rose to her face. Despite her valiant defiance, her bravery was faltering.
もうこのお城は僕ちんのものでちゅ。エリス姫はすべて僕ちんに握られてしまったのでちゅよ。
That was already true. She no longer had a home to go back to, nor a mother she could rely on. She'd known that. That was why she saved money so she could live on her own at any time.
貯めたお金で漫画喫茶に寝泊まりでちか。そんな暮らしが本当にできると思ってるでちか。人間は家族で生きるのが幸せなのでちゅ。一人で生きるなんてできないのでちゅ。お前のクラスメイトはみんな親の愛に包まれてぬくぬくと暮らしているのに。 どうしてお前だけが一人ぼっちで寂しく貧乏に暮らさなければならないのでちゅか。
Indeed, he didn't need to point out how unfair it was. Why was she the only one who had to suffer such injustice? All of her classmates got along with their parents, living rent-free in their homes. They were fed, given allowance, and didn't have to pay any of the bills. So why did she alone have to start making a living entirely on her own, wading through filth just to survive? It wasn't fair.
大人でさえ一人で生きていくのはあまりに辛く悲しい。愛がない。そんな生活をまだ親に甘え足りないお前のような小娘がどうして耐えられるというのか。
Kane fell to her knees as she wrapped her arms around her shoulders. She could no longer suppress the fear she felt as a child who'd lost her only protection.
だから来なさい。僕ちんの芋虫ランドの家族へ。赤の他人と家族になんてなりたくないという贅沢がどれほど罪深いものかすぐに理解するでしょう。
さっき
Who the hell would want to live in a kingdom of monsters?
いいえ、寝とっこ、そして3度の食事。そんな当たり前の生活。それが当たり前でないと気づいた時の恐怖はどうでちゅか。
The Siege King's forces were comprised of pieces twisted and hideous, yet giant and powerful. They moved irrationally, exterminating Kane's newborn pieces one after another. Those pieces born from the sacrificed parts of her heart shattered and vanished from the board.
また駒がなくなっちゃったでちゅね。さあさあ降参でちか。
僕開けるものか。
Kane reached back into the sewing kit with trembling hands, pulled out more pins, and stabbed them into the heart. Each one symbolized her impending surrender. Every time her heart was forced to accept that a child couldn't possibly live on their own. All she wanted was an ordinary life, not wading through filth and prowling in search of a nest day after day like a rat. Not scraping by on part-time jobs and sating herself on unhealthy food. If she drifted between manga cafes and friends' houses, she'd eventually lose those too and have no choice but to live on the streets. Was that all her life was worth? Her classmates all lived snugly, with parents who loved them and provided them with food and shelter. So why was she the only one forced to live in such a horrible state?
嫌だよ。そんなの嫌だよ。助けて。誰か助けてよ。
A home with a warm bed and enough money to lead a healthy life. Kane thought only her mother could provide her with such luxuries. But there was someone else who would, and he was right in front of her. He'd said she could be part of their family, and her mother would be there too. Only a family could provide their children with money and shelter. Only a family could love so freely and unconditionally. The world revolved around money. That was the reason everyone had to work. Children were simply sheltered from that truth. And yet they fight with their parents without a shred of gratitude. They had the gall to say they'd run away from home. No matter how sordid the parent, it was a blessing to have a roof over your head, a place to sleep. Meals were free. This man was right. Familial love conquered all. Families were wonderful. Glory to families.
エリス姫、よーく考えるでちゅよ。僕ちんはエリス姫が憎くて言っているのではないでちゅよ。エリス姫のことが大好きだから芋虫ランドで幸せになってほしいんでちゅよ。もちろんエリス姫がどうしても嫌だというのなら断ってくれてもいいんでちゅ。ただしこれだけは忘れないでほしいでちゅ。僕ちんを断った後に路頭に迷い髪の毛ボサボサのドブネズミみたいになった後にやっぱり私が間違ってました。ごめんなさい。とか言っても、その時はもう手遅れでちからね。芋虫の顔は一度までなのでちゅ。
The Siege King chortled with triumph, but accepting his offer would mean surrendering her heart. The filthy grin of that unpleasant man was looking more and more like an angel's smile by the second. Surely it would be crazier for her to keep rejecting his patronage out of pride. He was her savior who had imparted that lesson to her. The more she thought that way, the more appealing he seemed.
やだ。
That couldn't be right. Scum like him couldn't possibly be her savior, her prince. After all, the prince who would save her, who would grant her her happily ever after was...
鈴原鈴は来ぬ。
Kane's doppelganger, with those divine antlers and Scarlet's eyes, appeared from above and laughed.
あれは死んだ。生きてはおらん。 あれの裾を食らえば我は姉上様たちのすべてをすすだける。ならその前に貴様という殻を破らねばならぬ。その時にこそ我は生かす最悪の翼を存分に伸ばしてこの地に災いをもたらすのだ。 醜き男よ、その娘という殻を砕け。心を砕き、すりつぶし、虫けらの身分にまで落としてやるがいい。それでこそ小賢しきすすだきの秘術の生贄の末裔にふさわしい末路よ。
かしこまってでございまっちゅう。さあエリス姫、どんどん行くでちゅよ。
嘘だ。スズムが死んだなんて。嘘だ。どうした陸奥の末裔。 逃げ回るばかりで戦わぬのか。拍子抜けであるぞ。陸奥は親善武術なるものを生み出し後世に伝えたそうだな。その拳神の呪いに通じるかどうか なぜ試さぬ？
The divine tribute style was meant to be dedicated to a god, not for striking one. Aja Kencho, the fist to crush evil and demonstrate the righteous path. Suzumu was up against the avatar of Roku Kamehiko no Mikoto's curse. In other words, he was up against the wrath of God itself. It was akin to rain and lightning from the heavens. There was no evil or righteousness in nature. The same applied to her existence. So punching her would prove ineffective.
僕の拳はお前を撃つためのものじゃない。
ならば何のためにあるというのか。
覇者賢章、邪悪を破りで正しきを示す。
And that was demonstrated by showing thanks to God. Suzumu understood that logic. That was meant to be the essence of the divine tribute style. But how could he feel any gratitude for this girl trying to kill him with such a twisted smile?
打たぬのか。ならばそろそろ地層になろうぞ。貴様の生き肝のすす。
That attack split both sky and ground, cleaving the whole room in half. The saw's relentless assault had already rendered the room, no, the whole cabin, asunder. Unable to take any more, the floor split in two and began to tilt. Suzumu was swallowed by the rift in the room. Below was the foliage of a thick grove of giant trees. The room was a treehouse that had been built on the top of a towering tree. Suzumu managed to grab onto the floorboard at the last second. The rest of his body hung in midair. He wondered just how tall this tree was. It felt like he was looking down at a forest from a cable car in the mountains. The surface was slightly misty. Just looking at it froze Suzumu with fear.
哀れな姿よ、陸奥の松尾。かなえと二人でこのおとぎの国でいつまでも楽しく暮らせばよかろう。それをなぜ拒む？
She placed the edge of the giant saw on Suzumu's fingertips. It seemed the avatar of the divine curse wasn't bound by laws of the human world like gravity. She floated in the air and calmly gazed down at Suzumu.
彼女がそれを望むなら考えてもいい。だけどそれはお前の望みであって彼女の望みじゃない。だから考えるまでもない。
勇ましきかな、陸奥の末裔よ。ならば我の与えた最後の選択をして哀れな末路をたどるがいい。
いや、僕に選べる最後の選択はもう一つだけある。
この後に及んでどんな選択がある？何もない。貴様は今から我にとらわれ一匹も引きずり出されるのよ。
それを拒否すること。
Once she captured him, only death awaited him, a literal dead end. And if he fell from this height, his death was also guaranteed, but thick foliage lay below. Though the chances of survival were slim to none, it was still a chance, so Suzumu would not hesitate to choose it.
愚かな。この高さから落ちれば
5体はバラバラに砕け散るぞ。
じゃあ僕の肝もバラバラだ。それを一切れ一切れ探し回ったらいい。
貴様、
僕はお前にみすみすと食われるくらいならわずかでもこうすることを選ぶ。
須原すずめ。
The manifestation of the curse reached out for him, but Suzumu had already vanished into the world below. Not even the sound of him hitting the ground would reach that high up.
バカな男だ。この高さを多少茂った枝葉が救えると思うか。愚か者め。お前の王子は来ぬ。故にお前に選べる選択肢はない。その男の醜き芋虫たちの家族に加わることのみ。それを認めるまでにどの程度の時間がかかるかだけの違いしかない。
さあさあ、また駒がなくなっちゃったでちゅよ。そんなにちょっとずつ駒を増やしても焼け石に水でちゅ。もっとハートをドーンと明け渡さないと逆転は望めないでちゅよ。
しない。お前なんかに絶対。
Kane grabbed a fistful of pins and thrust them into the heart. It was impossible to even make out its original shape anymore. Nearly every part of it was covered in pins. She'd squeezed out every last bit of her heart to muster her final resistance. Several powerful pieces befitting that final flicker of the candle lined themselves up on the board.
平凡な毎日でいいんだ。おいらは幸せになりたいんだ。お前なんかにおいらの幸せを明け渡してたまるか。
Kane's white pieces advanced gallantly across the board. They stared down and clashed with the Siege King's black pieces. But her pieces were defeated one after another. It wasn't unreasonable. The man was wicked and crafty. On top of that, he'd stolen assets from countless other victims. The depths of all those wicked acts were the well from which he drew his own pieces. His power was far beyond what a powerless, penniless child could possess.
人鬼どもなど脆い。できることなど終末に目を背け、ただただその恐怖を先送りにすることのみ。陸奥の末裔も鈴の目の末裔も共に脆い。
これでまたエリス姫の駒がなくなってしまったでちゅね。もう駒は出てこないでちゅか。 ないなら僕ちんの勝ちということになるでちゅよ。
She had to keep creating pieces to avoid admitting defeat. But both the doll and heart pin cushions were already stuffed with pins. There was nowhere else for her to stick a pin into, so she couldn't create more pieces. Kane had given up all her heart and body. All that was left were her emotions. She had no choice but to accept she'd lost.
コマがもう出せないなら僕ちんの勝ちでちゅね。もうかけられる体はないでちゅ。身も心も毒々芋虫なのでちゅ。
Kane slowly fell to her knees, groveling and weeping. He was right. She had nothing left.
かけられる体はここにある。彼女のためにこの右腕をかけるよ。
誰？
貴様、あの高さからどうして。
ここはおとぎの国だと君が言ったよ。
Suzumu had fallen from a tall tree. There was no way the foliage could break his fall. He'd been prepared to die. But residents of this land, birds, butterflies, flowers, and mushrooms, had caught him. This was Kane Minobe's mental world. It would hardly sit back and let its prince die.
どこまで手こずらせるのか。
スズム、どうしてここに。
神の呪い、ようやく君に感謝できる理由ができた。
何？
君のおかげで僕はここにあれる。覇者検証、それを示せることを僕は心より君に感謝する。
我に感謝するだと。一人の文才でなんという傲慢。やれ、醜き男よ。見延課題の最後の心打ち砕いてしまえ。
今さらこの状況でどう逆転するというのでちゅか。やってみるでちゅよ、若造が。
下がってて、僕がやる。
スズム。
Suzumu lowered his hips and readied his fist. To demonstrate his wager to the Siege King, he'd stuck needles in his own right arm, the very embodiment of the Susahara divine tribute style. A radiant light shone in the air, and a powerful white piece, pure and sublime as ivory, descended upon the board. It shimmered brilliantly and sprouted thick antlers like the sacred deer, befitting an opponent of the divine curse.
バカな、この力は。
そんなコマ一つで僕ちんに勝てるなど思い上がりも甚だしいでちゅよ。
The twisted black pieces charged the white piece all at once, but they failed to take it. It was like they were striking a stone wall with eggs. No matter how much the grotesque pieces attacked, Suzumu's piece didn't even budge. Instead, they were destroyed themselves.
どうしてなぜ勝てないのでちゅか。 ここまで追い詰めるためにあらゆる努力を時間をお金を費やしてきたのに。
その努力がどれほどのものというのか。
何？
鈴原流親善武術が今日まで積み重ねた長き年月、悠久の1000年の前にどの程度のものだというのか。
A millennium of emotions, all to save a single woman. How could one piece of filth's trifling ambition stand a chance against that? Susumu's merciless anger smashed the black pieces one after another, a veritable blade aimed at evil. That sight was positively divine to Kane. It was the end of the line for all the evil that had dared to face Susumu's wrath.
お前の野心など最後の一かけらまで残しはしない。お前に逃げ場はない。滅ぼす最後の一片まで。
僕ちんの駒が
All the hideous pieces were exterminated. Eradicating the filth was all that remained.
鈴原スズメ
The divine curse swung her large saw down from the sky. But that blade could not cleave Susumu's sublime peace. The saw was stuck in it and could not be pulled out. The divine curse frantically tried to remove it, but then Susumu slowly rose to the board and made his way over to her.
今こそ神に報じるこの感謝を。
我こそは六神彦の御事の呪いなるぞ。その我がなぜ人鬼の末裔などに。
彼女の心の痛みに僕を導いてくれてありがとう。だからもう君の居場所はここじゃない。神の呪いはあるべきところに帰れ。
兄上様、私はまだあなた様の無念を晴らせては。
Susumu slowly lowered his hips and readied his fist. The divine curse was frozen in place and couldn't move. She just looked on in panic, anticipating her own end.
兄上様。
覇者賢章、邪悪を打ち破りて正しきを示す。
お前誰？どこから現れた？
The man gripping Kane by the shoulder and trying to drag her down a filthy alley was shocked at Susumu's sudden appearance.
スズム助けて。
なんだお前、邪魔だぞ。
鈴原流親善武術、鈴原鈴いざ。
The fist created to save a single woman crushed evil. Susumu drove his fist into the slovenly man's abdomen. The man's stomach twisted like a whirlpool, and he was sent flying as he coughed up a filthy spray. His large body crashed into the ground and rolled across the sidewalk, landing face up. Susumu's face expressed a desire to crush evil, an indignant expression that even the divine curse would have cowered before. Taken aback, the man crawled across the asphalt as he made a break for it. Kane felt like she was dreaming. The man who tried to take control of her entire life had been erased with one punch.
Susumu, どうしてここに?
Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is audapostrophe. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.